Hello and welcome to the video on levels of organization. This is a concept that you're probably carrying over from biology class, but I wanted to make sure that we were still talking about it as a group, even if this is just a refresher, and then to go through it and give you an example of each level. So the levels of organization, at least as far as we'll discuss them, begins with the atom at the first level. So going through these, I'll just give you an example of one thing from each of the various levels. But as far as an atom goes, for example, oxygen, a single oxygen atom would be an example of the atomic level. So like any single element, right, would be something that would apply at the atomic level. The next level is the molecule level. So if we're thinking about something that pertains to biology, right, oxygen gas would be a good example of something there. You can see that there's a water molecule in the image that's being used over on the side, so like H2O. Certainly water works as well. So anything that's covalently bonded together, right, makes that definition of a molecule. But then a macromolecule would be the next step up. So the example would be proteins. So you think of all the different macromolecule groups, right? So you have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and then the nucleic acids. So all of those would be potential macromolecule groups. So all of them will come into play for us at some point or another, working our way through the class here. The next level is the organelle level. So you think of something like the mitochondria, that is what's pictured in the image over there on the right. So the mitochondria is going to be an important one that we talk about, especially from sort of like a sports performance perspective. Like number of mitochondria is actually something that can change in cells. That's part of like conditioning. It's part of also how we decondition, is like mitochondrial efficiency and things like that. So that's an important one to be aware of with this particular class. But then the cell level, we could be talking about an individual muscle cell, an individual nerve cell, an individual fat cell. So the one on the right over here, I believe that's supposed to be a fat cell. So still, it's any type of individual cell type. Right, so then as far as tissues go, we'll get into tissues in more detail when we cover the histology section, but epithelial tissue is like the outer layer of tissue in the body. So like we'll go through and talk about different tissue layers and tissue types, how to identify those tissues under the microscope. So when you're going through and looking at some of those slides in class, or if you're using the online equivalent to that stuff, you'll be able to go through and identify those correctly. So then the organ is just an individual organ from the body. So an example I gave was the lung. Over here, we have the stomach as the organ that's shown in the picture. But then you have an organ system, right? So you have a collection of organs that are working together. So we have the respiratory system as the example that I provided. So you think of like the lungs and the diaphragm, the esophagus, and then all of that sort of like working together as part of the respiratory system. But over here, we have the digestive system, right? So you have the stomach, the liver, right? The large and the small intestine, so that there's a collection of organs, working together in order to facilitate digestion. But then once we get to the highest level, right, we have the human organism. So part of what we'll talk about in the next video are all of the different organ systems that we use. But all of these things collectively working together, all those organ systems are what provide you with a functioning organism. Now, when you study this in biology, you probably went beyond this level, right? You probably talked about, species and then populations, and then talking about communities, ecosystems, biomes, biosphere, like going all the way up through the levels. For the purposes of our class, we end at the organism level. So like we won't talk about like the way like groups of organisms interact and things like that. That's beyond the scope of our class. But it is good for you to know that the levels of organization. Again, you're probably carrying this over to some extent, I would imagine, from your biology background, but just ranging from the atomic level to the organism level. It's good to know those steps in between. So use your notes from the video to answer the questions at the end, and I'll talk to you more about this one in class.